each year that more and more people are moving into the area. I can tell that by the traffic. I think I mentioned the first week on Broadway Street in Sulphur Springs, if you get about 10 cars in front of you, it's a major traffic jam. Horns are honking and everything just like they were in Lewis. I am an alcoholic. My name is Gary Kincaid. And I am really, really, really grateful for a sobriety date and for a new life. Mine started July 25th of 1994 out in West Texas. And today I live in Sulphur Springs, a little town east of here. And I'm delighted to be with you. I thank you very much for allowing me to come be a part of your group this way each year. And I would urge you, whenever you get the chance, I love to tell my story. Not because I like to hear myself talk, though I'm accused of that from time to time. I love to hear again the job that's been done on my life by being a part of this fellowship. I am more amazed today than I've ever been in my life. I've been sharing with some new folks that I'm working with that if you are new here, it's all of us do it. We want to compare ourselves to other people. And I'm really grateful that early on I got taught out in West Texas, there's only one comparison I ever need to make. And that's me today to the me that got brought in here on Monday, July 25th of 94. And I can recognize the guy, and I remember the guy. But I'll hear from time to time in meetings, and it may be people's attempt for humility, but people say, I'm just as sick as I ever was. Well, I'm not. If I was that sick, I guarantee you I wouldn't be here. And this is a part that some people tell me I shouldn't say. If I had known how really sick I was, I never would have even started. It was worse than I thought. And I thought it was pretty bad. You can't scare off new people that way. Just hang on. You're in for a heck of a ride. I hope I share with you during this month that this thing is about surrender. And it took me a while to accept that I do not surrender to alcohol. I surrender to the actions of the 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And in my case, that equates to surrendering to a power greater than myself that I was going to have no relationship with, except that my life finally came to a point where I could not stand me any longer. The book talks about the hopelessness and futility of life as we've been living it. I understood that when I could finally read. And it seems to be necessary for each of us in our own way, and they're all different, to experience what we in here call a bottle. I just don't know anybody that has ever volunteered for Alcoholics Anonymous. And most likely that would be true for the Al-Anon family groups as well. You'll hear people from time to time say, I don't have to be here, I volunteered, and I want to say, like hell. Something drove each of us. And I have found out we are the only organization in the world full of grateful members who never wanted to be here. Nobody ever wanted to be here. And I will tell you today, I've never been sponsored by having to write a gratitude list. But if I were to write one, and sometimes when that comes up in a meeting, I'll share with people, I am really grateful for whiskey. For a long period in my life, I believe had I not had that, I don't know if I'd ever reached the point to finally have to surrender to recovery. We talked some in here, and by the way, tonight is 3 through 9, and I know some of y'all say, how in the heck is he going to get through that many steps? Well, we're going to, because that's how the book does it. But we talk a lot about faith. And I want the alcoholics to go back and look in your life, and if you're new here, look in your recent life. Had somebody told this to me when I got here, I would have said, that's not the case at all. And today I know it's the case. Do you remember those times when you went to the liquor store or you went to wherever you bought your booze and just getting it in the car, you felt a sense of relief? Just knowing that, in my case, it was under the seat or it might have been in the glove box, but just knowing I had it, somehow I started to feel better right there. Or looking at the clock, it's 3 o'clock, and thinking, man, 2 more hours and everything will be okay. You know what that was? That was faith. That was faith. I knew if I could just hold on till I could uncork that bottle. And at the same time, I knew that trouble was coming. It's very difficult. It's very, very difficult. It was very difficult for me to gain an understanding of and to accept the idea of complete, total powerlessness. And that faith I had of got it under the seat is for me an illustration of how powerless I was over alcohol. Because I also knew some of those times I've got a wife at home. I've got children at home. I've got commitments I made. And I knew that I was going to open that bottle before those commitments. And in the last years of my drinking, I pretty well knew what was going to happen. I wasn't going to show up. I've never met one of us, and if you're new, think about this. Look at your own life experience. I've never met one of us that wanted all of the consequences that occurred in our lives. Not just to ourselves. I did not want the lives of blameless children. I did not want, when I was a pastor, I did not want all of the hell I caused in those churches. I didn't want my mother crying for me night after night. I didn't want the children's mother, as she told me when I made amends, that she would be in bed and she wouldn't be asking, where's Gary? She would be asking, what's wrong with me that he's not here? Bill has that line in the big book that the most baffling feature of alcoholism for the alcoholic is our utter inability to leave it alone. That's powerlessness, and I didn't have a clue about that. What I knew on July 25th of 1994 was that I could not drink. And I found out later this was more important for me. I knew I couldn't stand the person that I'd become. And those are real close. And I think I shared with you the first week. I'll forever be grateful to my first sponsor that when I finally detoxed and we talked, and he asked me 2 questions. And I've been asking these questions of people for the last, let's see, 29 years in 1 month. I got my first sponsee when I was 11 months sober. The first question he asked me is, do you want to be the person you are? And that surprised me. And what surprised me even more is I almost yelled it at him. No, I don't want to be that person. And then he said, do you want to find a way to live where you never have to take another drink for as long as you live? And I said, yes. And he said, all right, I'll work with you. And I've thought about that over the years. And if you read this book as we go through the first 2 steps, and we end up on something that you read every week, Bill's a good writer. For me, over the years, this program has become so practical and so pragmatic and so simple. It never deviates. I do, but it doesn't, and it always has an answer for that. But he does a good job of making his case, and then he sums things up. I mentioned to you last week, page 44, he makes a summation. In the preceding chapters, that means the doctor's opinion in the first 3 chapters. It's a good idea to read those if he's saying that. We hope you've learned something about alcoholism. Well, today that tells me a couple of things. One, I didn't know anything about alcoholism before I got here. I was a certified therapist. I was an ordained pastor. I had a wall full of advanced degrees, and I was totally ignorant about the illness of alcoholism. And I say it in a joking, loving way. And Beverly, you knew a lot of these people. I got sober in West Texas. Roughnecks, oil field workers, truck drivers. I used to say they were people that couldn't spell cat if you spotted 2 letters. And that was so vital to a guy like me who thought I was so intelligent and that I needed to learn something. And these guys knew what I'm to find out. No, I needed to do some things. That action is the key here. And if you're like I am, I've got a lag time. About 2 years from now, I'll understand what's happening now. I never get it at the moment. You just get on the path and stay on it. One day you're driving somewhere and think, that's what happened that November 2 years ago. And it comes to me, at least, in that way. But Bill makes that summation about the first 3 chapters in the doctor's opinion. And then you read it every meeting. Our description of the alcoholic, well, that's the doctor's opinion in the first 3 chapters. The chapter to the agnostic, that's chapter 4. And our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. Well, I have to confess to you, it didn't make it clear to me the first time through that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own life. That probably no human power could. There, A and B is step 1. That God could and would have solved. There's step 2. It's about that simple. I am grateful, and you do it any way you want to do it. And by the way, I'm not here as an expert. I'm here as someone who knows my experience and who has had a faith transfer from alcohol. First, this program, and today to a God that I can do business with. But there's no separation of that God in this 12-step program in my life. I remember getting with Jerry, probably the second week. We've gone through this stuff. He's drawn out my life experience around drinking. And I have come to the conclusion up here that from looking at my own life experience with alcohol, it's a power greater than me. None of us wanted to do all of the things we did. That's a good indication. I've never met somebody that said, as I started mentioning a while ago, I can't wait until my wife is yelling and the children are crying and my mother's disappointed and I'm getting fired again and I'm getting, boy, that's what I want to do with my life. If that's the case, then we're not powerless. We just that path we chose. And it's part of my experience in here that trying to blame alcoholism is just a fruitless endeavor. There's really no one to blame. If there is anyone, it's got to be only me. But I don't even believe I'm to blame. The way they told it to me in West Texas is, Gary, you've got to quit taking being an alcoholic so personal. You know, all that talk that I did early on about my family won't ever let me forget, they're so ashamed of me, all that kind of talk. It wasn't the family, it was me that was ashamed of me. All of that stigma that I thought was attached for people out there was the stigma I brought in here with me that I attached to it. Jerry was kindly mean enough one day when I'm trying to tell him that I'm just about the lowest thing that ever walked the face of the earth. He said, man, that's extreme self-centeredness. I said, Jerry, I'm not telling you how wonderful I am. I'm telling you what I saw. He said, yeah, but you're still the only one you have on your mind. Extreme self-centeredness. And then he said, we're not buying any kind of fake humility. Yeah, I'm glad they didn't do that. But then we get to talking about this, and he's asked me that second step question when I told him I was going to have trouble with God. And he said, do you believe you're powerless over alcohol? I said, yes. Do you believe that there's any power in the universe greater than alcohol? I said, yes. And he said, good, we're on step 3. Now I'm hearing people in the rooms, and I wasn't hearing good back then. I still hear a lot better than I listen. It's an ongoing thing. But I would hear people say, oh, in step 2, I got right with God. I've got my God there. I'm back with God. And I'm thinking, what's wrong with me? And Jerry said, doesn't happen there. He said, all you got to have at that second step, it doesn't say came to believe in, it says came to believe that. And on this basis of you becoming willing to believe that there's some power greater than alcohol and greater than you, you're on your way, bud. Provided that you take certain simple actions. You see, the thing that would have gotten me is I wanted to do recovery in my head. I wanted to get it. I wanted to understand it. And I needed those old guys that couldn't spell cat without spotting them 2 letters to show me that you don't get it, you do it. It's about taking actions that seem absolutely senseless in light of the bag of garbage that I drug in here with me that was my life. And Jerry would say, it is. It is senseless to try to apply your mind to fix your mind, because your mind is where the problem is. It took me a long time to accept that. But I say the ABCs are the first 2 steps, and Bill writes that on page 60. Got squiggly writing. Being convinced of what? The ABCs. We're now at step 3. I believe I shared with you that first week or 2, step 3 was the topic. And it came to me, and I very hesitantly introduced myself and said, well, what I think step 3 means. And Jerry leaned over and he said, pass. Now, I was never yelled at. I was never talked down to, but I felt like he stood up and screamed, you idiot, shut up and pass. But he didn't. He said, pass. And then he got the book out after the meeting and showed me these sentences. He said, Gary, why do we care what you think step 3 means? Bill writes, just what do we mean by this? They didn't need to know what I meant. I need to find out what the book is saying. And just what do we do? 60 to 63 is our 3rd step. That's been, I'm going to say, 350 days out of the year. I read those 3 pages, 2.5 pages every morning. It's part of my starting the day. I've never memorized it. I had a sponsor that said, don't memorize anything. If you memorize it, it may always have the meaning it had on the day you memorized it. Let it be new. And for me, if you're new here, step 3 is not a cook step. It is a take step. It's a surrender on a daily basis, not something I did back in the suburban group in early August of 1994. And it's really very practical. Now, I know many of you in this room, and none of you are this way, but all of you probably live with people and know some people that are constantly being the actor playing the director, trying to arrange the lights. Now, we don't do it, but we know people that do it. And right beneath that, he describes what I call my drunk law. Has nothing to do with alcohol. Were we not producers of confusion rather than harmony? Pretty well sums it up. No matter how hard I tried, and usually with really good intentions, to get everything straight, I was a producer of confusion rather than harmony. And I don't have time to go back over it. You have to look at your own life. It's my experience, therefore my belief, that I, and probably you, were producers of confusion rather than harmony before I ever took my first drink. Drinking certainly was gasoline on the fire, but I had me on my mind all the time before I ever started drinking. And he's going to give me Remember, it's simple. He's going to give me 2 hints of how I can find out if I'm being the actor playing the director. Blaming and complaining. You know anybody that does any of that? Blaming and complaining. That means that I'm trying to arrange the lights to say, or my life would be okay if, and just, and I'll tell you what, I've only been here a short 30 years, but I've not lost the ability to blame and complain. We'll pick up, what's the word, an antidote for that next week. And then we go over to, I think this is a beautiful page from the middle of 62 to right before the prayer. And we kind of find out, at least for me, I find out that the center of all of my trouble is not out there, it's in here. If you read Bill's writing, he doesn't say that there aren't problems. He said the trouble from the problems arises up from within. You know, life's going to be life. I can either be troubled by it and then start blaming and complaining, or I can start practicing a little restraint and it'll pass. At least I try not to make it worse by putting my mouth on it, or my hand on the horn, or my one finger salute to the drivers or whomever. That doesn't affect any of them, it affects me. And then when I get home, I'm in that attitude where it affects my children and everybody around. So we're doing step 3. We get on our knees and do that. Long before I was ready. Remember, I've shared with you that my sponsor was not interested in me knowing what I was doing. He was interested in knowing that from his point of view, I was ready to do it, and he knew the next action I needed to take. So I asked the foolish question. Okay, I'm going to turn my will over to God. And he said, no, you're not. I said, well, what did we just read? And he said, I don't know. Read that stuff again. You're going to turn your life and your will over to the care of God. There's a big difference. Now, this is just me again. You can do it the way you want to, but I'll hear it from time to time because I have to get out of the driver's seat and let God drive. If I do that, my life's going to wreck. God is not my chauffeur. I've got to take the actions. It's kind of like God is in the GPS seat, if you will, and I need to listen to directions. I'm one of those when I hear people say, God has a plan for my life. For me, that plan is not where I'm going to live or who I'm going to marry or where I'm going to work. That plan is these 12 steps. And if I will surrender to the guidance of that plan, the other stuff kind of works out. But I've never believed and still don't believe in a God who's up there pulling strings, just putting me exactly in the right place at the right time with the right people. Book will say, you know, this is how it is so long as we stay close to him and performed his work well. Remember, there's caveats to all of this. But I asked him, well, what's God's will? And he said, read the book. We believe in AA, Gary. God's will for an alcoholic is take your inventory. After step 3, God's will is do the 4th step. Well, that's way too simple. But that's exactly how the book says it. And you all have heard me say this before, and I'll read this from page 72 and then back up a little bit. This is another place where Bill explains what he's doing. And this is the beginning of step 5. Having made our personal inventory, what shall we do about it? We've been trying to get a new attitude, a new relationship with our Creator, and to discover the obstacles in our path. He just summed up what the first 71 pages of the book is all about, so that I, through taking these actions, might gain a new attitude and a new relationship, not an old one back, a new relationship with God. That's pretty simple. And y'all have heard me give the illustration, and I don't say this in a joking way. It's my story. I call alcoholism spiritual constipation. Have any of you in here ever had physical constipation? We all have, right? And when that occurs, you remember how you say, you know, I want to spend a few months trying to figure out how this happened. Before I get rid of this, I want to find out what I ate and who caused it. I need to get a more in-depth understanding of just what constipation is. That's not our response. We just want that stuff out. Well, I came to you people, and every new member of both of our 12-step groups, because I've been around enough of my Al-Anon friends to know it's true for them too. We come in here with a lot of stuff inside us, blocking us from any relationship with God. My whole life, folks, I thought I needed things added to my life in order for me to be okay. The right woman, the right job, the right money, the right circumstance, the right funeral. You know, there were all kinds of things. It could be something out there would change, that I'd be okay. And it really amazed me that the trouble never has been out there. It's in here. And what I needed was not anything added. I needed some things removed. And I had no way of getting over that spiritual constipation. And Bill's going to give us the way here. First of all, I need to inventory it. It's really pretty simple. Y'all called them resentments. I didn't have any when I got here, until I sat down with the sponsor and started writing, and I discovered, yeah, I had some. Some I'd had for a long, long time. Fear. I didn't have any of those until I sat down with the sponsor and found out that fear ran my life. Y'all have heard me say in previous years, you know, I told Jerry, I just can't think of any fears. And he said, well, he had a cup of coffee. He said, if this coffee cup was full of black widow spiders and I poured it down your shirt, would you be afraid? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, go ahead and put down spiders for the fun of it. And remember, he knew my story by then. He said, are you afraid your children are always going to be ashamed of you? And I said, yeah. And he said, put it down. Are you afraid of getting sick and no one to take care of you? And I said, yeah. Put it down. Are you afraid of never being able to, you know, like retire or have anything in life? I said, yeah. Put it down. Are you afraid you'll never have a meaningful, loving relationship? Put it down. Or you're afraid that people are always going to remember everything you've done and your life will forever be defined by that? I said, yeah. And he said, put it down. And I tell you, newcomers, it didn't take very long before I had a page full of fear. Didn't even know where it came from, but I sure didn't need to know. I didn't know what to do with it. Because what I had been doing with it, and this is part of that powerlessness, and this is part of the unmanageable part of step one. What I had been doing about it that I didn't know I'd been doing about it is I'd been having faith in that alcohol. Not a thought out one, not a spoken one, but a real lived out sense of well-being, just knowing I had it. Even when I knew that drinking it was going to cause more trouble, but I had faith in it. And now I'm left and my life is unmanageable. I don't have anything to manage these resentments and these fears and the harms done to others through sex conduct that keep running through my mind when I'm not in a meeting. And I lie down at night and try to sleep, and the squirrel cage just starts. That's where I came to understand what it meant to depend upon alcohol. And my life is unmanageable without it. So I've got to find new management. And that's where, in the beginning, that sponsor and a home group and people calling me and people holding their hand out to me and people giving me rides and people telling me to get in the car and people showing up to claim their 2 square feet. So I could walk in the room, and I didn't realize it. I couldn't verbalize it. But within just a few weeks, I was already getting that sense of comfort from just being in the room with other alcoholics that heretofore I was getting from knowing that I had the bottle of whiskey under my seat. That's why it's so important for those of us who have been here to continue to claim our 2 square feet. I can't tell you tonight, I don't want to embarrass her, but I walk in, there's Beverly. I've known Beverly since I was 5 months sober. I knew, she and George are a part of my life that would be hard for me to explain. But I can walk into a room and there's certain people, when I just see that they're there, I can breathe deeper than I've breathed all day long. Well, each of us needs to understand that we're that person for somebody else, and we may not even know it. After a very short time, new people, you're not coming to meetings because you need a meeting for what you can get. I was taught you go to meetings for what you can share, for who you can help. That a big part of recovery is, yes, taking these steps and finding other alcoholics to share what's happened to me with them. And like I said the first week, I can probably find me a drunk at Walmart. It's easier to find them here. And my reason for being here is to try and bring the adequate, accurate message of AA, which is out of this book, which is not 90 meetings in 90 days, which is not just don't drink and go to meetings. It's do these things. And because you're constipated, it's do them now. And we got pretty good instructions. If you haven't done one lately, I highly recommend a 4th step, just out of the book. Not all of these handouts, not the treatment center stuff, not something your therapist made. Just try plain and simple inventory out of the big book. Knowing that I'm doing this to have these things removed and to find a way to effectively share my story with somebody else that's new, and they may not have opportunity to have that counselor or that treatment center or that anything other. than this. So we sat down and tell somebody about it. There's two sides to a fifth step. One is doing yours. The other is being the person that hears one. You know, as a retired psych therapist, I can't tell you how many people who have come to me thinking, I want to get him because he can be my therapist. I ain't a therapist. I'm not listening to a fifth step to do therapy. I'm listening to a fifth step to have an objective look at your subjective experience that you've written down. And to remember what you said. So when we do the eighth step, I maybe add a thing or two that you might have left off. Then we go home and read that part of before 6 and 7. We spend about an hour considering the first 5 steps, not the whole thing, not just the. Am I a little bit clearer on step 1? Am I kind of solid in my willingness to believe that there's a higher power? Now that I've done 4 and 5, can I accept that maybe I am, in a broad way, on a path to doing God's will? And it may be that I can agree with what it says there, that I have this feeling that perhaps I know him a little better. And that happens to a lot of people. It didn't happen to me. When I sat down, when I got home and reviewed what I'd done, and I saw in black and white what my life really looked like, it kind of made me sick to my spiritual stomach. Thank God for a sponsor, and I try to always do this with folks. What he told me is, Gary, you may feel that way, but that's not in you anymore. That's on paper now. That's on paper. It's not in here. It's now on paper. You're not causing any of that to happen again. You've got it on paper, and we've got some things you can do with it. So little by little, it's going to leave your mind as shame, and it will someday become a great asset, because that's what you're going to use to be able to help other people who are just like you. And I ask the question of those of you in the room, where else, other than AA, can any of our dark past be of any kind of use any place on earth? It's just not helpful to anyone but other alcoholics, or perhaps other members of the Al-Anon family group, if that's your problem. You know, if I go to a Sunday school class and I'm telling them about, well, one night my neighbor's wife snuck off and met me in the garage. While we were doing that, she got sick and vomited all over both of us. I get people kind of backing their chairs up to get out and circle. And I guess if you were a member of the Al-Anon family group, you say, yeah, when that happened, I came out and turned the water hose on both of them and called the cops. They're still going to back out of the circle. But if you and I experience our own recovery through these steps, then we discover, at least I've discovered, I don't have to talk any alcoholic into not drinking. I don't have to talk them into doing the program. If they're an alcoholic and I'm sharing my story of powerlessness, my story of hopelessness, my story of just becoming willing, my story of very faultingly and fumbly and going on through the actions, and discovering one day that I wake up and I live in Sulphur Springs, Texas today, and both of those children that I abandoned, they live there. And everything is not healed between us. It's like I say in my introduction, I got a new life. And my alcoholism is not a part of their present life. It's not a part of our present relationship. If I'm sharing my experience with these actions and you're an alcoholic, you're going to get it. I don't have to convince you of anything. This program does the convincing. We sat down and we look at those defects of character. Any of y'all surprised you had any? And this is purely, you can do it however you want to. I'm a person that believes I have only 4. I don't use any of the list of off the beam or any of the, I don't use the 7 deadly sins or any of that. I use the 4 in the resentment inventory: fear, dishonesty, self-seeking, and selfishness. And I find that every other defect that can be identified falls under 1 or 2 of those. There may be some of you that are just better fit to deal with multiple things. 4 has been about all I could handle for these years. And when I allow it to be that simple, it seems to always be those. And Jerry explained to me, you're going to ask God to remove those, as it will benefit him and others. He said the first place that we're going to use that is on our 9th step. And that never came to me. I'm thinking about forever. And after we made that 8th step inventory, he said, now as you go out and talk to your brother, you pray, God, relieve me of being dishonest, self-seeking, selfish, and afraid as I sat down to make this amend. That was helpful to me. And what he told me is, you're not going alone. You're going to go with the presence of that higher power that you don't even have a relationship with yet, but you won't be in the room alone. He also took me to the 12 and 12, and I'm not going to read it, but I'm going to urge you to look at the first paragraph on page 80 of the 12 and 12, and it's in the 8th step. It's been a part of my sobriety since I was 8 years sober when I first discovered it. Not when I first read it, when I first discovered it. Since defective relations with other human beings have been the cause of nearly all our woes, and here's a drop the mic sentence, including our alcoholism. That's pretty powerful. Read that paragraph. And the 8th step stands by itself. There's some work to do. I brought my list to Jerry on the Tuesday after we did our 5th step. He had a different list. Some of mine he took off, and he said, you're just going to them, making them a higher power, so they'll make you feel better. And you're going to hurt them. You know, I had a lot of people that I had one ex-wife. I've had 3 sponsors, and all 3 of them, and listened to stories, said the last thing you ever need to do is go make that amend. You would damage them. And I've got to listen to somebody. But I had a sponsor that believed and made direct amends to such people wherever, not whenever. And again, I'm not trying to be the definitive expert, but I would hear for years, well, when God's ready for me to make that amend, he'll put them in front of me. But my sponsor didn't believe that. He said, you know where they are. It's your job to seek them out, to get permission to go see them, and to make a direct amends. And simply the best I can do, and I've got 3 minutes, but I will finish. I went to my brother. He was first because he was in town. I couldn't make like to the kids because I had to get enough money saved to travel the 500 miles to where they were. I went and made amends to my brother, and I mentioned something about money, and he said, Gary, don't worry about the money. If you'll just stay sober, that's all I want. Thank you, God. I went back to Jerry and told him, he said, you go back to your brother and find out how much you owe. What I didn't know was that I was going to be paying back or repurchasing my integrity and my self-esteem and my ability to look my brother in the world in the eye and my willingness to, no matter what the cost, try to do the best I can with taking these events. And I went back to him and told him, said, now I've got to pay you back. Do you have any idea what I owe you? He said, I can tell you exactly. He went to his house office, came back with a folder. It was $14,000, either $320 or $230. It was $400 here, $200 here, $500 here. I didn't have the money. And Jerry said, money order, tell him what you can do, make the best deal you can make, and keep it. So I started with $10 money orders. And he said, don't hand it to him, mail it to him. And put a note in there. And just say something about how glad you are to have him as a brother. Have some memory of something y'all did early on. Just something personal. Don't mention being an alcoholic. Don't mention the event. One of the greatest gifts that AA has given to me is that for the last 30 years, my brother has had a brother. And I never realized how important that was going to be in my life. You repay love with love, hate with love, and money with money. If anybody tells you it's not about the money, it's about the money. My whole life today stands on two things. One is the power of those amends. And two, we'll talk about next week, and that's working with other alcoholics. But nothing happens in my life until I was willing to make those amends. The financials took almost 16 years. But after about 6 months, I was free from them. And I could spend 4 hours talking about that. I would not have the life I have today were it not for the 9th step of Alcoholics Anonymous, and particularly the financial amends. So we'll do 10 and 11 next week. And I'll tell you, since I was a former pastor, remind me and I'll tell you a religious story about Christmas that you probably won't want to repeat in Sunday school. Thank you.